Hey guys, my name is Colson Rosa, and welcome back to Seraphim Stories. Today I want to talk to you guys about the third book in my medieval fantasy series, the Tales of Amcronos, and that book is The Nomads of Sadron. But before I do that, I want to mention my other series, the Sentinels, and how I just completed the rough draft for the third book in the series. As editing is taking place, I want to let you guys know that we're working hard to get that second book out to you, but take heart in the fact that I just finished the rough draft for the third book, actually, which is sitting at 336 pages right now, and I'm so excited for you guys to get to read it. That being said, there is a minor spoiler warning for the Nomads of Sadron here in this video, but I'm going to try not to get into too many specific details so that for those of you who have not read the book, nothing major is ruined about its story. So that being said, let's jump right into it. I think the first thing that's really interesting to note about this book is its progression. Now, I mentioned in my video about the Slaves of Mazaron that there are a lot of very specific things you need to keep in mind when you're writing a sequel. And I'm hoping eventually to get to come back and do a video just on sequels and how they build upon previous stories, but also remain unique and stand out on their own. That being said, I think the Nomads of Sadron shows those elements even more so as it has to progress off the first and the second book, but at the same point in time, progress not only the story forward, but your understanding of the entire world of Amcronos, everything that has been learned so far about the way that this world works, and really resonating with those characters even and the struggles they've faced. These struggles of perhaps some of Lavrin and his team and the loss that they've had of some of their former members to the Haven Realm, but the hope that they then draw from that fact, knowing that it's just fuel to keep them going. It lights sort of a fire under them that they want to save more people from the grip and reign of tyranny that Natas has placed over the world. You then also see the progression of characters like Umanos, who's a Leviathan who has seen his life changed as his people are freed from the grip and influence of Jafer, who is working under Natas's rule. And he also then gets to progress not only in the sense of progressing along with his own people, but even himself as a character gets to come to recognize that he can atone for his past mistakes, can work through the bondage he was once under, but that bondage no longer defines him. And he's just one of many characters that progress so much farther in this story. So the second thing I want to mention then is scope. Put in broad terms, scope is the overall reach of the story. How much is covered within it, how much of the world of Amcronos then is shown, and how far and how many people its story would then affect. So this book shows a much larger view of Amcronos. In the Knights of Torn, we just focus primarily on the northwest region and sort of setting the baseline for this fantasy world. And then in the Slaves of Mazaron, this was built upon, but you only got to see the Leviathans and the stone golems primarily. In this next book, however, as we see the forces of the King of Light trying to call upon any ally they can find in this hope and in this fight, they know they can't do it alone, but they have come to recognize that they need to reach out to the far expanses of this realm if they're going to have any hope of pushing through this darkness and fighting back this enemy. So we get to see an expanding narrative that then shows the vast landscape of Amcronos. Now, of course, there are other regions in the map that are not yet shown or detailed, but I didn't want to just have a map for the sense of the overall setting, but I want a lot of those places that are positioned in the map to then have importance to the story itself, and for our characters to reach many of those different places and show the interesting characteristics within them. So this expanding narrative is much richer in the sense of the fantasy that has been built up for so long, now getting so many of its payoffs. And then as we look forward into books 4 and 5 in the series, we see even what is built upon in the Nomads of Sadron used to its full effect as the story continues. You get to see so much more of a fantasy world that in many ways has been domineered and oppressed by Natas, so it's not showing its full colors, but it longs for that restoration of what it once had been. Another thing is I want to talk about the dual tension that takes place in this book. There are two unique storylines set to eventually intertwine that both carry immense weight and significance in the war for this world. It's not like one is just a side story and the other's the main one that's important. But they both really work together and actually foil each other. So you see both war in the north and in the south and how those contrast each other and a lot of the different choices that are made, different struggles that are faced, and then even our heroes responding in unique ways to both of those challenges. And they're meant to be looked upon as an overall narrative, but one shown in two vastly different ways. And I'm not the first author who's ever done this. I think C.S. Lewis in The Prince Caspian, which I'll be talking about later on this channel, does an excellent job of really using this thematic element to his advantage. But I'm doing a similar thing, although it is interesting that Lavrin is the main character. He's still the protagonist who is fighting in these desert sands of the south, trying to stop a civil war from breaking out among the tribes in this barren wasteland. But his struggle is so different from the ones of Lord Auden, Lord Denethor, many of the other characters in the north that are letting out this rallying call to anyone who might hear their voice, that now is the time for them to rise and make the stand, or they might never have the chance ever again. And this is a very similar point to the next main concept I want to discuss, which is the unified importance of these storylines. The differences in both the North and the South are not there on accident. They're meant to highlight such different avenues taken by these teams, different life choices, but yet a common goal that remains throughout all of it. And actually, they're inspiring each other without even knowing it. The group in the South, Lavrin and all of his friends and allies, are fighting under the basis knowing that the war that's taking place in the North then is going to be successful, or at least that's their hope. And the army in the North, as it faces some bitter losses, small wins, coming to realize that it can't do this on its own. There's no chance for them against Natas without aid. Sees Lavrin and his team as just one more shining light of where that aid might come from, especially if they're successful as they then leave the Mazaron Mountains and head south into the deserts. Although most of the time is sometimes spent with Lavrin as the protagonist, he is not alone in his goals or his endeavors. And this brings me to my next point, which is the supporting cast. No main hero can do everything alone, and that's something that I really believe in. I really think that although you can focus on one or two characters, you don't want to cut yourself short and make all of the other supporting cast around them just cardboard 2D cutouts that don't really have a lot of motivations, desires, dreams, goals, hopes and needs, struggles and fears of their own. So I really wanted to give these other heroes a chance to shine, and even some of the villains or anti-heroes they go up against chances to be fleshed out as well. So almost in a symbolic fashion, sometimes Lavrin takes a back seat to allow the reader to see how much more goes into this sense of war, this sense of struggle and hardship and fighting. And especially, I think, in a story like this that shows the hardships of war, it's so much more important. Because you have this rich, intricate, detailed fantasy world with unique creatures that kind of break the mold of what a typical fantasy novel might do, with even their own civilizations and cultures. You then have things that tie it back to reality and really resonate with the reader, like warfare, like character struggles, like unique people each trying to piece out their own mindsets and worldviews and their way of life to then affect everyone else. And I think this supporting cast doesn't just take place in the Southern storyline. I think even in the North, you especially get to see the people of Pelios, which are one of my favorite that I've written, as an excellent example of these creatures that live in a sort of rocky, molten wasteland of volcanoes and a place that would seem like death and destruction. And everyone just automatically assumes that they're kind of rugged barbarians with a lot of regrets and a fighting warlike lifestyle. But actually, once the layer is kind of pulled back and their true nature is revealed, they're shown to be a people with a lot of art and culture and history and diplomacy and democracy that you never might have expected. And those specific details just help to build into the larger sense of the world so much more. As I've mentioned previously, I didn't want to just throw all the fantasy aspects of this series into the first book and just overwhelm my reader. But now that they've had 2 books to really get their feet set and have a strong foundation, they then get this third book where they can just really sink their teeth into so much more of the fantasy that's discovered. But that fantasy is then tied to something like a supporting cast that makes it feel relatable to maybe your life and your friends and your family, and how a lot of the big accomplishments maybe you've had in your life you never accomplished on your own. You had people believing in you and helping you. The last thing I then want to talk about when it comes to the Nomads of Sadron is the tension present in this book. The problems facing our characters are not only external, but they are internal and between members of the team. So I'm going to just briefly talk about each of these 3 aspects and elements within the story. The external threats are equally large, building upon the threats of the last 2 books. Of course, they're both external for the southern and northern conflicts that are taking place. Especially in the north, you see they try desperately as much as they can to be fighting this war and this battle on their own, especially in the castle of Sreya. But they come to recognize that they're going to lose it all if they continue with that kind of mindset. The struggles rip them apart, cut down to the very seams of who they are as an army, who they are standing for the King of Light, and if this is even his mission and goal for them, to be taking on Natas like this. And they almost pledge it then as their assessment of the king and his dedication to this mission to see, will he bring aid for them? Will he bring others to fight alongside them as Natas has now amassed his armies and positioned them directly on the crossroads they are hoping to take to travel east and cut into his empire and break it apart. In the south then you see very similar struggles of these external struggles trying to stop a civil war that's been boiling and brewing for many years now, just waiting to erupt in these desert tribal lands. But yet the struggles are equally internal and between members of the team, because they start to wonder, if they die out here in this desert, is anyone going to know? Is anyone going to remember them? The only people surrounding them are foreigners who see them almost as intruders into their land and into their affairs. And this causes a lot of strife in our main heroes, doubting themselves, wondering where they could have been instead in their lives instead of struggling through this intense heat and sand of this desert. And then also between members of the team, as they have very different mindsets on what's happened to them and very different approaches to solving the issues. These tensions then are used to actually highlight what they stand for, what they believe in. They're brutal and real, but at the same time they're necessary and worth dealing with, because when you come to the other side of these disagreements, you see a bond that is even tighter forged, and the characters are put at their own decision, their own choice for their path of, are they really going to devote themselves to this, and are they really going to remain together? Because the easy way to back out of this would be just to break their team apart, but it takes so much more work and effort if they're going to hold it together. So guys, I really hope this inspired you about some things to be thinking through when you're considering your books that you are writing, or if it's even a short story that you're considering being an author of. I would love to just encourage you, if you are interested in reading my books, to go to the Amazon link in the description and checking them out, or recommending them to a friend who might really enjoy reading these wonderful tales. If you have any questions about some of the things I talked about, whether it's progression or scope, maybe dual tension or the unified importance of this story, or even how to build up a better supporting cast, or how to add dramatic tension into your stories, please comment down below because I would love to hear about it. And guys, I really hope that if you have questions about some of the things that I mentioned, you look back to previous videos I've made on this channel that might help explain to you some of these concepts I've been referring to. I want to thank you guys so much for the support you've given me, and I hope you have an amazing day. God bless.